Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Daniel Oliveira. I'm the Associate Director for Funded Studies at CII. Before we start, I wanted to remind you that you can find links to past webinars in our blog website, and the address is here on the screen. That's also where you can find information about future webinars. Right now, we don't have any future webinars, but we'll keep posting them. So another way to stay up to date with our webinars and other initiatives is to follow us on social media. And you can see here a few options, a few channels that you can use. So just leave it there for a while. And so I encourage you to connect through your preferred social media application. We are glad to host this webinar today, and this is part of a new research team that CII is funding, and it's RT 381. So we have these numbers for every team. We'll kick off in December, on the 2nd and 3rd of December. This is online, so no face-to-face meetings, of course, right now. And the team will present its results in a CII event in 2022. Our topic today is adapting through organizational agility. And this webinar will introduce the topic by showing some drivers and challenges, and also some potential benefits and opportunities. This is the first time that CII has decided to fund a project on organizational aspects of capital projects, or broadly speaking. And we believe that this can really create step changes in the way we deliver projects. We hope that you find this introduction compelling and consider joining the research team. So because our primary goal with these webinars is to recruit people for new projects. And this is the second webinar we have for new projects. CII research projects, if you are not familiar with our projects, bring together academics and industry members with the goal to create innovation and improve the business of companies in the capital projects industry. When we say business, we are thinking beyond solely the delivery of capital projects, the execution, but also considering how projects improve the business of companies, of owner companies, right, primarily. This requires understanding the connections between business and projects, and this research project has the potential to help us understanding these connections between capital projects and business. So that's one interface that it's interesting here, but from an organizational perspective. In CII projects, industry input is fundamental to understand the problem, to help the data collection effort, to interpret results, to make sense of results, and to deliver the project outcomes, or reports, how we take this information back to the industry, back to people that didn't participate in this project. So that's why we have to put a lot of emphasis on the industry participation. It's critical for project success, for our research project's success. So members can sign up by sending a message to Chrissy Delaney. Her email is shown here on the screen, and I will show this again in the Q&A time. So we'll see this again. Send her a note. This is open for CII members only. If you're not a member and you like to get engaged, send her a note. When we collect data, when we can have outside experts contributing at some point, but not consistently staffing the team. So if you're interested and you are not a member, you can send a note. We'll try to figure out ways to engage you, but this is primarily for non-members. The plan for today is that we'll have a presentation by the panel. I'll introduce the panel in a second, and then we'll have a Q&A session. And you can type questions in the questions tab in your GoToWebinar window. So I'm showing here a screenshot of that. And our panel today is composed by Dr. Hala Nassereddin. She's an assistant professor of construction engineering and project management in the Civil Engineering Department at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Joseph LaBianca, he's the Gatton Chair Professor of Management, also at the University of Kentucky, and he's in the Gatton College of Business. So Joe is our academic expert on outside construction engineering, right? We have driving these connections to bring more innovation and different ideas to our projects. And so Joe is this connection to the academic world outside construction engineering. And he brings an interesting social network perspective to understand and improve organizations. We also have Dr. Jeff Russell. He's the Vice Provost for Lifelong Learning at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He brings his expertise in research for construction engineering and management. He co-founded the Construction Engineering and Management program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he also brings his extensive experience with CII research projects. And then Jerry Seppi, he's the CEO of EPM, which is a consulting company and a CII member. And EPM works, at the interface of capital projects and organizational design and development. So he brings a lot of this experience that connects these two worlds of organizations. And he used to work for IBM on HR and organizational aspects. And now he brings this connection to capital projects. That's what his company does. So it's really good to have this connection here in this panel today. And now I'll hand it over to Dr. Nasruddin so she can start the presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Hala Nasruddin. It is a pleasure for us to be here today. So the main objective of today's webinar is to engage more CII companies in our research team RT381. We are kicking off this fall, and we would like to take the opportunity today to introduce you to our research. So in this webinar, we will start by highlighting the need to adapt through organizational agility. We will also present the underpinnings of the research, where we will introduce the drivers of change, discuss different types of organizational network structures, and show a case study of the evolution of a construction company. We will conclude with the value that RT381 brings to our industry and the next steps moving forward. When we consider the capital projects industry, it wouldn't be an overstatement to say that organizations undergo significant change and are concerned about how they can cope with increasing uncertainties and continuous change. We don't need to cast our minds to a long time in the past to show that change is a prominent feature of our industry. Very recently, Shell announced that it will undergo a restructuring of its major shift from oil and gas to low carbon energy. Chevron also announced that it is taking several steps in response to challenging market conditions by reducing its 2020 capital expenditure. Not only have owners been going through change, a couple of years ago, Jacobs sold its energy, chemicals, and resources unit as part of its strategy to optimize its portfolio with a focus on higher growth and higher profit infrastructure and commercial projects. Very recently, KBR has also undergone a restructuring effort and transitioned from a three-segment business model into two segments by eliminating its energy services segment. These four examples are just snippets of the organizational change that capital projects companies have been experiencing. Now, there is an array of external and internal drivers that give rise to change in organizations. External drivers are located within the external environment of the company. For example, most recently, organizations have been wrestling with the pandemic and its economic impact, the shifts in demand it entails, and the operating restrictions and long-term safe working procedures it requires. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, The capital projects industry was already starting to experience disruption by changes in market characteristics, such as the increased competition and evolving sophistication and needs of owners. Advancements in technology and the digital transformation are also pulling capital projects organizations to embrace newer technologies and shift towards more data. Industrialization and the shift to off-site production are also driving change across the supply chain. Now, the list of external factors goes on and on. In addition to these external pressures that induce change in organizations, there are drivers located within the internal environment of the organization that also drive organizational change. Examples include the company's strategic plan to grow and become agile, advances in management strategies such as advanced work packaging or AWP. Also, organizational inefficiencies and performance gaps drive organizations to undertake change. These various external and internal drivers are future-oriented, and they envision possibilities for the future and how it could be different. In other words, they represent what we call the pull of the future. Along with the drivers that are pulling organizations towards the future are the pushes of the present. The drivers in this category influence our thinking and are components and trends of the current landscape that provide momentum for the future. An example of a push of the present driver is the aging workforce. As these two categories of pull of the future and push of the present drive organizational change forward, organizations also need to consider the weight of the past. The drivers of this category represent the legacy system in place and are barriers that inhibit change and that companies need to overcome. The weight of the past drivers help organizations acknowledge and understand the past to better manage uncertainties. This weight push pull triangle, also known as the future triangle, indicates that the future of organizations is not just about the future, but also about the present and past. It allows organizations to assign equal importance to each of these three forces, the interaction of which results in a plausible future that organizations seek. Now, to be agile and move towards this plausible future, capital projects organizations need to have a strategic plan and a tactical response that will influence its internal and external structures, its people and culture, and its processes and technology. When a company is structured in a certain way, we have to make sure that both the processes and technology that we are using and the people that we employ fit. As soon as the environment for an organization changes and the organization starts moving away from how it has always done things, the technology changes as well as the people. So when undergoing change, there should be an alignment between these three components. Today's webinar will focus on structures, and I will hand it over to Joe to discuss levels of change and the different types of organizational network structures.
So this is Joe LaBianca, and while I'm a professor of management, I have had some experience with construction, mainly with, for example, Gray Construction, who's focused on building projects like building automotive plants. So I know how they tend to approach things, which is to think mostly about each project as something that happens on its own and how they structured that particular project to meet their clients' needs. But if we start to think beyond just one project and look at the whole portfolio of projects that the company is engaged in, we can be thinking at the organizational level, how is the entire organization structured both internally, but also how is it engaging with, for example, subcontractors? And if we take it up to that organizational level, we can identify three different types of organizational structure. So one is what we call the internal network, which is that as you engage with different types of subs, you might say to yourself, okay, we seem to be doing more architectural work. Let's bring that sub into the network. Let's buy it. And so we vertically integrate, and we might add things like cement and various other types of activities within the organization. A second way that we can engage is what's referred to as the dynamic network. Here, we stick to what we do best, and every time that we need a particular activity, we bid it out, and we don't go necessarily over and over again back to the same subs. We just bid out each time and take the best available sub at that moment. And so this creates a dynamic network. And then finally, the last approach is that we keep going back to the same subs over and over again, and we build a more stable network. So these are the three main types of organizational structures. None of them is the best or the worst. They all have pros and cons to them. So it's interesting, though, to think about at the level of the organization, how are we approaching our environment and our market? So if we think about, for example, let me give you an example from the automotive industry. We can also start to think about how companies shift over time. If you go back into the 1950s, compared to today, automobiles were fairly simple. And so therefore, every company, every automotive company tended to be an internal network. It set itself up to be vertically integrated, where not only were they making their own chassis, but they were making things like their own batteries, and they were assembling everything. The nice part about this type of structure is that it's very efficient. You get a lot of control. What it doesn't do, though, is help deal with complexity, and it doesn't change very quickly. If we then move 40 years later and think about by the time we get to the 1990s, automobiles have become much, much more complex by then. So we have all kinds of new equipment, like safety equipment, new types of technologies, computer equipment that have come into cars. Because now we're dealing with more domains of knowledge, and because cars are becoming more capital intensive, the vertically integrated internal network is no longer a useful approach. So GM responded with a dynamic network approach. So basically what it would do is say, okay, I need this part. It would bid it out, and whichever tier 1 or tier 2 supplier could give that particular part at the lowest price, that was what they went with. And so this is a way of emphasizing cost, and it creates a dynamic network. A different approach was the one that Toyota took. So they were facing the same type of environment, and what they chose to do was a stable network approach. So what they said was, we're going to keep the same suppliers. And in fact, even as they moved, for example, from Japan to the US, they brought their suppliers with them and reestablished essentially the same stable network with them. This approach emphasizes quality, but it has the downside that it doesn't change very quickly. So that's part of the reason why Toyota does continuous improvement, but you don't see radical change happening very quickly within Toyota. And this, incidentally, this stable network, just because this is sort of what seems to have won within the automotive industry doesn't mean that it's necessarily the be all and end all. So for example, Boeing right now is going through a process of moving away from being a vertically integrated aerospace company to being much more of a stable network. Now, why they're doing it is for much of the same reasons that the automotive industry did. It's becoming more complex, more capital intensity, but it's also because they're dealing with a geopolitical environment. So they want to be in lots of different countries, and they want to make sure that those countries don't try to, their politicians don't try to hamper Boeing. So what Boeing has done is said, we're going to stick to what we do best, but we're going to farm out to, for example, make wings. We're going to do that in another country, and then we're going to have the engines made in yet another country, but we're going to do this within a stable network. The downside is that if you've been following what's gone on with the 787 Dreamliner, is that then they couldn't coordinate all those subs. And so that's created both quality problems as well as schedule problems. So just because you have a structure doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to operate the way you want it to. Everything, as Hala mentioned, has to work together, your people, your technology, and your structure. If we look within the construction industry, here's an interesting example of Skanska. So this is a network diagram, and this shows, if you look at each dot is a business unit, and if you look at the ones in blue, it represents Skanska's headquarters in Sweden, and then all of its branches in various parts of the world. And then in red, this shows you what the company looked like back in the 1990 to 94 region. And you can see things like it had cementation, India, it had operations and maintenance operations in Argentina, it had flooring, it had windows, it had ventilation. So it was very much an internal network that was vertically integrated. If we move forward in time, though, they end up divesting themselves of many of those types of things like ventilation and cement, and instead focusing on what they did best and acquiring other construction companies that did the same type of thing that they were doing. And they keep going back to the same subs. So they've created a stable network. And this tells you, just by looking at this, a little bit about their industry and what they are pursuing strategically. This would tell me that they must be pursuing much more complex and capital-intensive projects than what they were doing before. Otherwise, they would still be vertically integrated. The fact that they're not gives us a clue as to what's going on in terms of the projects that Skanska is taking on. So this is where I'm going to turn it over, but I hope that this helps you understand how we want to move the thinking past each individual project to understanding the entire portfolio and how that's affecting the organization level.
Well, good day to you, no matter where you are. This is Jerry Seppi from EPM, and I want to talk to you about the importance or the relevance and the value of this research and why you should be interested in it and why you should become involved in it. We are currently very aware of the impacts that are brought to us by the global pandemic and the impacts on consumer demand, and therefore our companies and our projects and ourselves. So it's substantial and it's right in front of us. But inside of CII, we've known for some time that the industry struggles with low productivity growth and has been for some time. That makes it open for disruption, and we see things like Elon Musk's The Boring Company, other digital and technological disruptors coming in and threatening us from the outside when that change should come from inside the industry. A lot of this has to do with and certainly has impacts on our organizations. The tendency is for us to respond reactively, and our change and the impacts are organizationally impactful, and that they are driven by finance, and we have to do better. So this research team of academics were chosen because the concepts of building agility by looking at network structures, because of their thinking, and that aligns with the current and forecast project direction. So today we're talking about advanced work packaging, I2PD, blockchain, other digital initiatives, and all of these things want to have a better, more adaptive organizational structure and plans that enable these things to be fully realized. These networking structures are a useful point of entry for understanding and for providing frameworks and practices that are applicable and useful. So this research is important. It needs your involvement. That's you personally and your company. Research like this needs data to be able to base study and understanding, and then make data-based recommendations. So I'd like to ask you to think about how you can contribute and how to make a difference to this important effort. I think we're going to give you Christie's contact information. Again, hopefully you'll see yourself involved and making a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Before we open for Q&A, let me summarize the next steps for RT381. This project will study the various drivers of change as illustrated in the future triangle that we saw, and will assess their impact on organizational change. We will also analyze the 3 types of organizational network structures at the project, portfolio, and company level. We will build a body of knowledge on organizational change best practices in the capital projects industry as well as in other related industries. And finally, we will propose considerations and recommendations for our capital projects companies to achieve organizational agility. We hope this work interests you to join RT381 and help us shape the future of our industry. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and I will hand it off to Daniel for the Q&A.
So thank you, Hala and the panel. We will now open for Q&A. For questions, please go ahead and type any questions you want to ask to the panel here. So, and I think we're seeing questions popping up there. One question that normally I think people would like to know if you're thinking about participating is, what's the commitment? So this team will work for basically 1 year, a little bit 1.5 years right now. Meeting, I expect mostly online, at least for the first year, at least for the time being, will be mostly online. Normally this is a 1 month, 1 monthly meeting of 1 hour plus a few otherwise face-to-face meetings that now will be online. So I expect that every other month we can have a longer meeting of 3-4 hours. So this monthly participation in a meeting, plus at some point some support for data collection, you may spend like maybe 3-4 hours helping that. Not everyone has to do that. Some people may help on the data collection more, and some people may help more towards the end in the presentation. So if you are helping at the presentation, at the end we'll have a couple of online rehearsals and then the actual presentation. So think of 4 hours per month that you put on this on average. And I think being online, of course, this may help. This may help you to avoid travel time and things like that. So I have a couple of questions here. Pandemic could create a tsunami effect as existing inventories are consumed without manufacturing being produced to fill that building backlog. This will create heavier weight on the pull of the future that many manufacturing organizations are not ready for. Pandemic is unprecedented. How does this model allow for that weighting, future triangles, triangle?
Joe, would you like to answer this?
Yeah. So, an example of this. So, if you think about, for example, in the automotive industry, if you've got a vertically integrated structure and you get something like a pandemic hitting you, it's very difficult to respond to it. But if you have a stable network structure, everybody in your network should be willing to work with you to try and help you recover very quickly. So think about Toyota and its army of tier one suppliers as almost like an ecosystem. That's what a stable network is. So you would probably see that companies that are organized in stable networks would be better able to deal with something like a pandemic. And interestingly, I think I mentioned to you that I've worked with Gray Construction, and Gray Construction is set up as a stable network, and we were asking them about the pandemic, and they've handled it very well. And also, anytime that they've had any kind of COVID outbreaks within the company, it's all been for the very few subs that they specifically bid out. So it's sort of on the margins, those new subs that they don't normally deal with. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of weighting, but it does affect how you respond.
Yeah, and that's an interesting topic for the project. Like that's a case that you could look how projects reacted or responded to the pandemic, looking at their networks. So we have another question here, and I'll answer this. Is this a research team? Is this specific to a CI sector? No, it's not. This is what we call overarching research. So it should apply in principle to all sectors. Having said that, once we have the team together, you look at the composition of the team, and that's where the data is coming, right? So sometimes we'll have 3-4 sectors represented there. Hopefully that's the case. We have all sectors represented. So the results can look at, consider specificities from other diverse set of sectors, but we encourage all the sectors to participate. Another question is, it seems the contracting model structure between the company and subcontractor turn into a major driver and source for lack of agility and inefficiency. Is that part of the research topic? Are you addressing that? It seems to be part of the cultural component.
Well, absolutely. The contracting model and structure of each of the projects that you're using, that is what ends up being the overall structure. And if your portfolio, for example, skews heavily towards integrated project delivery, then that's going to skew you towards building a stable network. If on the other hand, you tend to you're more of a agency perspective where you're bidding everything out, that would skew you towards more of a dynamic network. So we wouldn't view that as part of the cultural component. For us, the cultural component is where you start to look at practices within the organization. So as an example, how are the negotiators for the owner or the lead contractor engaging in negotiations with the other companies? And if you're doing a lot of bidding out, you're going to be much more competitive and pitting subs against each other. Whereas if you're more in a IPD setting, you're going to want to be more collaborative. So to us, those differences are more of the cultural component. That's how we would define it.
Joe, this is Jerry. I want to just pile on that for a second because I think there's a thread here that goes through those first two questions. That is, when companies, unfortunately, they'd like to think that it's the future and the present that they're dealing with for the most part, but the reality is that the weight of the past is something that's a very difficult force of gravity for them to get trajectory through. So it kind of weighs them down, and it's very hard for them to move through that. So ideas you just mentioned, like I2PD, where they've taken off in certain industries, in other industries that they've not. They've been very reluctant to do that for various reasons. So I would really see the research getting into, perhaps what are the hurdles or what are the things that can enable those ideas to work from various types of cultural backgrounds.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I'll take this next question. If we did meet in person, where is that meeting usually? Normally, in other circumstances, we would meet to kick off in Austin, but now it's going to be an online meeting. Then after that, each member company is asked, sometimes to host a meeting. So we would look at the composition of the team and see where most people are and try to make things easier for the travel plans. Also, many times the universities host. Sometimes universities host the meetings. So it's either at a member company or at a university that is engaged. Another question here is, do you intend to consider the decentralization pendulum that many of us have experienced when staying within an organization for 10 plus years?
So to me, that would be an absolutely fascinating topic to get into, because it depends on the organization. Some of them have just gone in one direction for 10 years, and then you might have others that are going back and forth, and they may be operating in different sectors that are dealing with different environmental factors, and so it might actually be a good response that sometimes you're centralizing, sometimes you're decentralizing, or it could just be that you're being, as Jerry said, very reactive, and there's not a plan in place. So it doesn't make sense for what the environment is that you're pursuing strategically. So being able to understand why this is changing within the organization would be very fascinating for us. We want to do comparative case studies of different types of organizations. And so if you have one that's going back and forth between being more vertically integrated, let's say, versus being much more of a dynamic network, that would be very interesting for us.
Yeah, and again, I think that if you are thinking of joining the team and you have these cases to bring to the team, that's a big contribution. If you can bring this type of case study or data to the team. So we have a follow-up here on the question about the pandemic. The person said actually more worried about the future for supply of materials that aren't being currently produced. So I don't know, just the original question is, how does this model allow for that waiting, and is more for the future for supply of materials that aren't being currently produced? And I think my question here is whether these are construction materials, I guess, that the person is asking, I think.
Right, and I was imagining something like cement or steel. And, you know, again, if you're vertically integrated, you do have control over that, but that has a lot of downsides as well, in terms of you know, being able to have expertise in all those areas. So if you're part of a stable network, you may be a preferred customer to a particular cement company or steel company. So I guess that was the way I was thinking of it when I responded. I wasn't sure if that was what the person was referring to.
Thank you, Joe. There's another question here: is this RT relevant to institutional and governmental organizations? I think this is related to the other question on industry sectors. So again, this is an overarching research, and we welcome actually all the sectors, including, I think a lot of our governmental organizations are in the facilities and healthcare committee. So we definitely welcome them. Does the team have any input on how, you know, and I guess we are talking about the capital projects organizations within governmental organizations. I think that's the question. Does the team have any ideas and, you know, any thoughts on that?
We're open to any segment of the industry. Yeah. We could study any aspect of the industry.
So
it's possible that if you're in a government owned project, DOE, DOD, that sort of thing, that you may feel that the structure is provided for you or limited in some way, and the question might be, can we get full value from participating in this? And I think that both the types of structures that are used now and if we can bring value to a government agency, I think that that's interesting to them, and perhaps there's information that you have to bring, both the data and ideas that can help the research for the other sectors.
Thank you, Jerry. We have two somehow related questions here. One is, which is most important, internal or dynamic or stable network? And then the second question is, do you see organizations applying multiple types of structures depending on knowledge area, or I guess knowledge or sector area? This might be for broader based conglomerates that cover several businesses. Would that be a part of the study?
This is Hala. I will answer the first question. So every structure is limiting and enabling. So each of these networks is going to have its own advantages and disadvantages. And we can't really talk about the best case scenario, just like we saw two companies responded with two different networks. It will all depend on the environmental changes and factors that are influencing this organizational change. And for the second question, maybe Joe would like to provide more details. But yes, one organization could have different structures. They could have a set of projects follow a certain network, and then a different set of portfolio follow a different network.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. You could imagine, for example, that you have one portfolio that skews very, very heavily towards you're just basically you're taking a construction management agency perspective, where you stick to your knitting and you just farm out everything to subs and you bid it out. And so you would be on one end of a spectrum as compared to doing, let's say, integrated project delivery or doing fairly simple projects versus more complex ones. But you could also imagine you could have a company that doesn't specialize in any one thing. And so they're using lots of different types of structures in different parts of the organization. So that would be one way of thinking about agility, is that it's employing very different structures, and it's able to do that very easily depending on the project. That would, one could think of that as almost like a tool belt approach. I see the job in front of me and I pull out the right tool. Most companies tend to end up in one of these structures because they tend to be better at doing one of these things than others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to. I don't know if that makes sense as a response there.
Yep. Thank you, Joe. We have a question here. Will this study go beyond supply chain structures? If so, how? And I think I understood the question being these structures that we saw, as opposed to maybe more social networks, or what happens in the projects. Maybe that's my take on the question. Maybe you have other thoughts.
Well, I thought that one of the things that we want to be able to do is to understand actual projects and how they're being set up. And, so we're going to be at the project level, but then we're also going to be thinking about the portfolio level. So we would like to get into actual projects and how people are acting within these projects and what that means at the organizational level. So let me give you just a very quick example of something that we could do. I thought it was interesting to watch a particular project that Gray Construction took on, where they took on a project where they wanted to learn how to be in a new industry. So when you're taking on a project like that, you're going to engage with subs you've never worked with, because they have knowledge about different types of construction than what you have. And where they were having a really tough time was that then 80% of their negotiations with these subs were being done by lower level employees. Those lower level employees were trying to beat up these subs on price. But if you think about the strategic imperative, it was to learn a new industry. So what they were doing inside the organization didn't match the strategic intent, because what you want to do is engage with those subs so you can learn how to do a new type of project in an industry you've never been engaged with. So we would like to follow that strategic intent and how people are acting down to that level as well, because it does affect the project level as well as the overall organization level. If you don't do those little things right, you'll never be able to move into that industry. That ends up affecting your entire org structure.
Thank you, Joe. Another question here: as we often have to tailor our approach to a project based on the client technology, as we often have to tailor our approach to a project based on the client, technology is often different on each project. Would this also factor into the research?
Yes, in just the same way that I described, like negotiations are one simple technology, but absolutely, all of these technologies will be different based on how you approach the projects. So yes, we would like to get into those topics.
So Daniel, that question could refer to the technology that's digital technology, and perhaps it goes to standardization. On the other hand, it could talk about the technology that is being used as part of the product process, the product development. It could have a different take on it. So I want to say that to say that the question could have various interpretations. Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm again just going back to, for example, a different industry, the automotive industry. If I'm in a dynamic network and I'm bidding out each part, then every organization is a separate organization. On the other hand, if I have a stable network, what I can do is set up so that my tier one supplier, my tier two suppliers are all tied into my IT systems. And so they know what's going on, and I can track what they're doing and can influence what they're doing in terms of things like quality or schedule or various other things. So depending on how you set yourself up, you can employ different technologies.
So another question, I'll take this one. General question on CI research team with regards to data collection. Do you approach different companies, survey methods, personal experience? We actually encourage our research teams to reach out beyond CI membership. We don't want to just to collect the CI members' perspective on problems, right? So we shouldn't assume that just surveying CI members will allow us to capture everything that is interesting or important. The actual instruments, the team will decide, and this is particularly important at the beginning of the project when they will settle their methodology, and they may go to decide to do case studies, is a survey, interviews, and I've seen all of that being used in CI projects. And it's all, we have agreements of confidentiality. Everyone in the team signs a confidentiality agreements. Access to raw data is restricted to the academics that are, doing the analysis, and never will allow publications to identify respondents or companies unless the company asks or allows. I mean, if it's a case study, but we follow up on every publication to make sure that everything is confidential.
And as you said, Daniel, at the very beginning, I know some people joined late. This is already a fully funded study, and we want to work with you folks to help define the scope of the project and what exactly you would like us to focus in on, because obviously we can take this research in a number of different directions.
Yep, I thank you, Joe, for mentioning that. I think the first 1 month or 2 months of the project will be very important to delineating this scope, right? I mean, how deep you want to go in certain aspects. You name technology, right? How deep you want to go understanding technology aspects or not. I think those are decisions that the team has to do, because it's a very broad topic that can be molded, like can be defined in different ways. We still have a little bit of time. I'll follow here with a question. Are the 3 types of networks, vertical, stable, dynamic, actual choices from companies, or simply different stages of evolution of an industry reflecting its maturity, quality, reliability, competition?
I would actually say that it's certainly in an industry, if the environment is pushing it in a particular direction, then you would tend to see a particular type of structure emerge. But notice that I was showing you the automotive industry as an example, where the same environmental change is happening to all of the companies, and yet GM and Toyota responded differently. And so there is also strategic choice that's going on. And you can see that some industries first go in one direction and then they swing back. So really what we think are the most important drivers are environmental changes, and generally those are long-term environmental changes. So as an example, just if the ability to use carbon goes down, that would be an example of a long-term environmental change that will affect how companies structure themselves.
And every time we see models, right, the good thing about models, I see them as tools that help us to understand, abstract the problem before we find solutions. And the bad thing is that they're all somehow limited, right? But they all help us to understand aspects of it. And many times we use several models to explain one issue. So they are maybe not mutually exclusive. We are running out of time here, but before I will make sure that any other questions we have here, we follow up. We'll provide them to the team. So one last time, you see, like in the screen, Christy's contact information, kldelaney@cii.utexas.edu. If you find this important, if you find this exciting, please send her a note. We'll follow up with more information. If you have questions, you're not sure and you need to talk more, we will be glad to talk. If you want to talk to the team, we can also put in contact with the team, with the academics and industry members that have already signed up. Again, we plan to kick off in December, like early December. I can see that the initial weeks will be more intense, and then once we settle on the scope, we'll probably go to the monthly meetings. So again, if you are interested, send Christy a note. I wanted to thank everyone. Thank you for attending this. Thank you the panel for speaking today, and wish you a very good day, or wherever you are, evening. Thanks everyone. Okay, bye now.